Hello, and welcome to TADA Talks. Today, TADA Talks is sponsored by Dealer Pilot. I'm Todd Burgon, the Executive Director of the Trillium Automobile Dealers Association, and here with me today is the Director of Government Relations for the TADA, Frank Notte. Today, we're going to talk about the world of government relations. Frank, thanks for joining us. Nice to have you on.
Thanks to be here.
So Frank, obviously the year of 2020 in all aspects of business, whether it's government relations or anything else, has been all about COVID. So maybe we can not spend our whole time today talking about COVID, but certainly I think it's worthwhile for our listeners to talk a little bit about what happened back in March and the role that your department played with the association, and kind of ironically where we've ended up almost full circle, but we seem to escape what I call the worst case scenario on many occasions here. So why don't you just kind of walk us through a little bit about where we started in March, where we are today, and in your words, how it is that we remained open, because certainly that's very positive.
Yeah, absolutely. So, taking myself back to March 15th, I think that was the Saturday after March break. And then that was the news that we were likely going to have a lockdown soon enough. The news started coming out more and more in the global media. And I think everybody, government, business, regular folks are just wondering, what the heck is going on? What is this virus? And I very clearly remember it was Monday or Tuesday in mid-March. And, the premier is on the TV saying that businesses are going to be closed, locked down. It felt like the world was coming to an end, so to speak. Obviously, I think everybody first thinks about, what does that mean for their own family and kids in school? And then, for guys like us, obviously it means what we're trying to figure out what this means for dealers. And thankfully, in the first round of lockdowns, we did survive. Dealerships remained to be open, both sales and service. And then we went immediately to work. We lobbied ministries that were important to us, like government services that regulates us, MTO, economic development that takes care of the broader auto sector. And our strategy was to make sure that they understood, A, how important the auto sector was, but B, to also ensure that the service side remained open, because it's probably not top of mind to a lot of regular people or politicians that municipal fleets, police, ambulance, hydro, water, wastewater, all these kind of businesses have fleets that need to be serviced and maintained, no matter if there's a pandemic or not. So we wanted to make sure that they realize that you can't just close these types of businesses down. And thankfully, in the first two rounds of shutdowns in March, we were pretty much unscathed. So that's credit to making sure you have a focused and clear message to government. And we were successful in that. I think we should take a lot of pride in that. And then, of course, the showrooms got closed in the third round of shutdowns. So obviously that wasn't ideal. Sales are still allowed to continue, but it's very hard. Who wants to really buy a car without test driving it and that kind of thing? So we knew we'd have to hunker down, but rather than just wait around and say, okay, what are we going to do now, or let's just wait for the government to do something. Todd, you know this as well as anybody, that we decided, what can we proactively do to make sure that once the government decided to start reopening the economy, that we were among the first to be included. So we went to work and we consulted with CADA, our Quebec and Manitoba friends, and we created documents to say, this is how you should operate your dealership in a COVID environment to make sure that your staff and employees remain safe, how to do a test drive properly, sanitize your car. We could be here all day talking about it, but those are the things that once created, we shared with the key government ministries and said, hey, we know that you're not going to open the economy until public health says it's safe to do so. And you know that from your conversation with the premier.
Correct.
Todd. And we said, but once you are ready to reopen, here's why we should be among the first. And we made that case successfully. And I'll never forget, it was May 1st when Vic Fideli announced that of the 7 types of businesses able to open first, dealerships were among them. So a big point of pride, to be honest. I don't think we should shy away from that.
No, and you should be proud of that. And when I think back, there's nothing that describes the 3 months of other than just chaos. You've got, obviously our association, many other association manufacturers all fighting for the same thing, and that is to find a way to get the dealerships reopened safely, and just an experience that really none of us had ever been down, right? So the one thing that strikes me is that the what I call the arsenal of information that you've been gathering over the years and that we had on hand really played a key role when you think of the economic impact studies that we could easily demonstrate to the government, the number of employees that we had, how our businesses were structured, and things like that would then ultimately have us say, by the way, now we're also a very safe environment. Here are the protocols to open us. So they had two reasons to take a second look at us versus us just telling us, hey, we're waiting over here in line. So very, certainly a proud moment and a very tough time, so to speak. And I guess relief, I think, was what I experienced, and so did the dealers. So one thing I wanted to ask you, though, is that sometimes, it goes, I guess, not unnoticed, but it should go unnoticed because a lot of the work that we do is not in the public eye. So talk to me a little bit about some of the key influence points. And one of them for me that I'd like you to comment on was when MPP Pragmi Sakaria met with our president and dealer, Cliff Lafreniere, and really, the impact and the importance of that meeting. Because I think if you just, articulately said, hey, our president met with the Minister of reducing red tape in small business, they go, okay, that's great. But, talk about the significance of that meeting, because I really do think it was an important conversation that they had.
Yeah, absolutely. So Pragmi is the MPP for Brampton South and Minister of Red Tape Reduction in Small Business, working with Vic Fideli in that ministry. And the call proactively came from them to us saying, we want to talk with Cliff and some staff just to get a sense of what's going on in the retail level. How can we help? Is there something we should be doing, should not be doing? So it's always best if you get those calls from government. Stakeholders like us are always calling MPPs and emailing them, but it's good to know that our association was able to be held in such high regard that they are proactively calling us, and that's a dream of every stakeholder. So Pragmi basically said to Cliff, we understand. He basically laid out two things. He said, number one, we want to be sure that the province isn't going to do anything to upend or overlap what the federal government's going to do. So they basically said, and this was reiterated to me on our weekly calls with his ministry officials, that we're going to wait for the feds to do what they're going to do, and then we'll try to fill in any gaps that we feel might exist with our own funding programs. So that was issue number one that they made clear. Number two, the minister asked us, what exactly is it that you guys are needing? And Cliff made it very clear from the onset. Probably no one remembers, but at the time, the Canada Emergency Wage Subsidy was only 10%. And Cliff, I remember, said very clearly that that's a drop in the bucket. That won't even make a difference given that, how big the situation was. So the minister promised to bring that back to cabinet, and the premiers would often meet with the prime minister every week or so. And, that message got to the feds that, 10% wage subsidy isn't going to cut it. It's not going to do anything. And then I think it was about 2 or 3 weeks later, the feds announced that it was going all the way up to 90%. So to have a champion like that in cabinet, listening to stakeholders like us, and then reverting that information back is what it's all about. And that was another win that we got. You're not going to write this in the bulletin and send out to members, but like you said, but that's the type of thing where if you have a respectful relationship, speak honestly with politicians, those are the kind of results you're going to get.
Yeah, and I've heard, and so certainly of our counterparts at the CADA that played a large role in ensuring that queues became a reality for our industry. I've heard so many business owners tell me that that literally saved their businesses for a period of time over 2020. So you're right. Sometimes those things you don't put them out in the bulletin, but little things go hand in hand. And I just mentioned the CADA, and I think it's important that I certainly give them some acknowledgement that as our federal group, I've never seen in my time the provinces the National Association, and even the manufacturers associations, all rowing in the same direction, for the betterment of our industry. So little things like this make a big difference, and I think it's certainly important that we remember that moving forward, we're going to get a whole lot more done as we all work together and in unison. So that was certainly a big win for us. One thing that I often got asked during this was the premier, and I think it was you and I would have anxiety at 12:45 every day, wondering, okay, they're going to make an announcement. We've been tipped off that we have an idea of what's coming, but we don't have it in writing. So then at 1 o'clock, you and I would listen in on what was going on, and then at 1:05, our phones would be ringing off the hooks and emails would be blowing up saying, okay, what are your recommendations? And sometimes we would be told, it took you guys 2 hours to publish that recommendation, or it took you guys 3 hours to send out a notice of what it is that they can and cannot do. So I'm a big boy and have thick skin, and I'll always take criticism when certainly it's warranted. But I wonder if you might explain a little bit about our process so people can understand maybe why sometimes it takes 5 minutes for us to issue a bulletin, and sometimes it takes 5 hours, or even sometimes it takes a day and a half.
Yeah, and I don't think anybody wants that bulletin out at 1:05 more than me and you do. So,
right.
We sometimes you do get a heads up from government to say, hey, they might say, hey, look, make sure you're watching the announcement today, or the announcement is going to be on this topic, so you're ready. But you really don't want to publish anything until you actually know 100% full stop that that's what the government announcement is going to be. So you're right. So shortly after 1 o'clock, the premier gets up. We get the news release, and then you want to make sure you've understood it correctly in the way that the government wants the public to understand it. So you understand it, and then you call your boss, Todd Burgon, to make sure he read it the same way and make sure we're both on the same page. And then we want to make sure that it's the best legal advice. So after we think we have a good handle of it, we want to make sure our legal team gets a chance to see it, make sure that it's accurate. Because you got to remember, a lot of these things are not they're not law in the sense that they're actually written clearly. And what I mean by that is, these are recommendations, public health recommendations, and then the questions become, like this past week was, well, what does that mean for my service department? Can I have customers sit there? So there's a lot of those little gray areas that come into play where the government is either silent in the regulation on it, or they don't address something, and those are the spots that we want to be sure that dealers are covered off as best they can be by our legal team. So so then, and it's often happened, especially early in the pandemic, right, where our legal team will come back to me and you, Todd, they'll say something, and then automatically we'll say, well, what about this or what about that? We know we're going to get questioned on this, and then it's a big back and forth. So, I think we're on the same page where we want to get out the best information as fast as we can, and then if we know something is going to take more than 24 hours to figure out, then we'll tell people up front and honestly just say, hey, we don't know, but we promise to get back to you with what it means for item A, B, and C. Yeah, so I mean that's the process. It's not always fun. It's stressful, but the last thing we want to do is put something out there that isn't true, or that there's more gray area than there should be, because at the end of the day, it's going to create more chaos when dealers are already stressed just running a business, never mind conforming to regulations.
Yeah, and I think that if I, certainly speak from a dealer's perspective, they'd much rather have us be that thorough than put them at risk where, they're now in the wrong side of the law or facing the wrong side of the law. And so that's kind of my methodology has always been to our group internally and also to the board, is that, hey, we have to consider that, whatever we were publishing out, we're really making sure that we're giving advice where 1,100 dealers could defend it if they were challenged on it. So I just thought it was important that we explained our process a little bit, because sometimes it can be a little frustrating for some that, we have 1,100 dealers underneath our umbrella and 1,100 A-type personalities that run them, and that's the way that it should be. So I expect them to have high expectations of us, but they're, a process is a process for all the right reasons. So let's talk a little bit about what happened during COVID and even following that with the MVDA. So one thing that certainly you and I were writing a list as the days went on from the very beginning of the shutdown is some of the challenges that the language in the current MVDA brought to us and our industry, and and certainly some of the confusion that it brought. So, talk a little bit about what you would consider to be. We've used the word shortcomings, and they're not criticisms; they're just realities of something that has been around for a very long time. So, just maybe give a little bit of a summary as to what you saw as some of the challenges that exist within the MVDA, and kind of what some of our next steps are from that learning.
Yeah, so the two main issues I think that were highlighted in the days of COVID, early days, were electronic signatures and the inability to do business offsite for dealers. So just quickly about electronic signatures, they have actually been the law in Ontario since 2000, believe it or not. There were some exemptions that, and I remember it clearly, there was an exemption that real estate deals were not able to be transacted by electronic signatures. That has since changed in the province, but there was 5 or 6 of them that were exempted from the law. But I honestly think before March, how many deals were really done using strictly internet sales or using electronic signatures? So there was a lot of confusion because people thought that they were illegal. And I think where the confusion came from was that some banks, not all of them, but then some captives, again, not all of them, were pushing back saying you can't use that, or it's not legal. And to the credit of you, Todd, and Tim Rouse at CADA, you guys lobbied the banks and the captives pretty aggressively and finally got them to back down and have some sort of reasonable expectation that they can be used in most, if not all, cases. Because how can you sell a car if your showroom is closed? People can't come to the dealership. So credit to you and Tim for that. And I think because they eventually did come around, there was a huge relief on that issue. So that was one. But the second one was definitely because the showrooms are closed. Dealers were not able to go to test drives at people's homes or offices, that sort of thing. You can't transact offsite someone's kitchen table if they wanted to.
Right.
So we started looking into it, and if you can believe it, the MVDA was first passed in 2002. So I was in third-year university, and the iPhone hadn't been invented yet. That's how old I am. And even when it was passed in 2002, the regulations that we're currently under were first published in 2008, and then they came into effect in 2010. So 8 years it took the government to consult and implement. And you know as well as I do, in 8 years, the world changes quickly, and the auto industry is no different. So what we're starting to realize, and what our members have asked for, is to change that piece of legislation to say, look, if Uncle Joe wants to do his car deal at his kitchen table, why can't he? Or if I want to do a test drive at my office and I love the car so much, why can't I sign the bill of sale right then and there? That should be allowed. So we've taken that back. What we're doing right now is trying to figure out how to best is do our research and our homework on the issue. What are the pros and cons of it? Are there, should there be some sort of rules around how a special, when I use the air quotes, how a special transaction like that should or shouldn't differ from me or you walking into a dealership? So we're in the early stages of that right now. And then the process is to, approach government to say, here's what COVID highlighted in the auto retail world. Doing business off-site was a hindrance. God forbid it should happen again. And the act this part of the act is so old, it's time to update it. And here's why. And then it's our job to really convince the government to do that. And the government will always, no matter what party, the government's going to always say to themselves, why should we do this? And if we do, we're going to have to defend it. So let's make sure that, we're on side, it makes sense, all that kind of stuff. So probably in the early in 2021, we're going to approach the ministry and say, hey, look, here's a problem, and here's what we think should be the solution. everyone thinks you just pick up the phone or send an email and then the government's going to respond. It really is a tough slog. Just the example I said, the government itself took 8 years just to publish and implement regulations. So I want to kind of temper expectations. It's a high priority for us, no doubt. But then the ministry also has other things that they're already doing. And, the OMVIC of home warranties, Trillium, is being revamped. Mm-hmm. They're coming in with new regulations for the real estate industry. So, you kind of have to figure out where that ship is sailing and then how to jump on that ship if the ministry is going to go in that direction. So, and that's a challenge with every stakeholder in every ministry. So.
The one thing that this whole thing certainly exposed to me, and it's something that wasn't new to me, but certainly to the extent, was that our industry needs to do a better job at evolving and embracing change. And it's clear to me that, when you look at the MVDA, and even when you mention a cell phone, geez, forget 8 years. You get a cell phone for Christmas, and 8 hours later, you have to have it updated because the update that they sent it with is already out of date. So it's certainly exposed to me that, not just as an industry, but as a society, we have to start evolving just a little bit faster, if we're going to keep up with the times. But, regardless if we get another pandemic or we don't, this is the new way of doing business. So these are the things we have to push on so that we can do business this way. You mentioned Tim Rice, and I want to just make sure that we're very clear in embracing what they did on a national side. When we would take things like the challenges that we were having with electronic signatures and the banks and the captives to Tim, because it's a federal issue, they really took it seriously and they ran with that ball really hard, Tim and his team and Hugh in Ottawa. So kudos to them. And like I said at the beginning of this, everybody seemed to realize that we all have to work as one big team, and we got a whole lot accomplished in that short period of time. Speaking of time, we're almost out of time, but one last thing that I thought might be a good way to end this is that before COVID, you were on the brink and we were on the brink of finishing a pilot with in-house licensing and making the world a whole lot easier for dealers to put plates on cars and not have to go line up at their local Service Ontario, or be restricted about how many licenses they could get in that day. What happened?
COVID, unfortunately.
Yeah. All right. So what's happened after COVID?
So I'll rewind a bit. So in the spring of 2019, the government announced that the in-house licensing project would be rolled out in a pilot in the spring of 2020. And then obviously March is when COVID hit. So the ministry was very, very proactive in reaching out to us, saying that the folks that are responsible for rolling out and creating and designing the program have been redeployed to manage all things COVID. So it's a reasonable explanation. I don't think anybody would argue with that. And we did talk about it in the summer, that they reassured me that it was still going to happen, but obviously COVID takes precedence. So we're eagerly waiting. Hopefully with the news of the vaccine here, things are going to be a little bit better in the future, and we hope that once things hopefully calm down, the pilot will be back on and start to be rolled out to dealers across the province. What I do want to say though is that a person who really made this happen was Mike Harris Jr. He is the son of the former premier. Mike, soon after being elected in June of 2018, Mike had decided to take up this issue. We were obviously very happy for it, and we were thrilled that he decided to basically champion it. So not a lot of people out there are experts on the legislative proceedings, and it'll put you half to sleep most of the time. But each MPP is entered into a draw at the beginning of a legislative session. So you grab your number, and then when it's your turn, you get to either introduce a motion in the House, or the House has to debate what you want them to. And often it's a private member's bill. So basically a piece of legislation that's not introduced by a cabinet minister. And these MPPs who are able to introduce them will often pick an issue that's either dear to their heart, important to their community, or something that they're really just passionate about and want to fix in the province. And And Mike decided to choose our sector, and our, at the time, obviously our number one priority before COVID was getting in-house licensing. So, it takes about 1.5 to 2 years by the time the first MPP is able to do their thing in the house until, his or her turn is up again. So, we are incredibly thankful for Mike to take, that limited opportunity and grant it to us. And you probably remember all the media that he drove at the auto show in 2019. Radio, he was just incredible, making sure that the message got out to say that this was an important issue. So
that's awesome.
He's the number one champion on this issue, and I know he'll continue to be as we work towards getting the program eventually rolled out.
Well, when you explain it in that manner, quite frankly, it really shows that he really bet on us and bet on something that he thought was important. So yeah, absolutely. Thanks to Mike for doing that. Frank, you and I could probably talk for another 2 hours, but we can't. I want to thank you for spending some time with us. Frank Notte is the Director of Government Relations at the TADA. And I'd like to thank Michael and his team at Dealer Pilot for sponsoring today's podcast. I'm Todd Burgon, signing off for this edition of TADA Talks.